So, welcome everybody to this new lecture about psychedelic tourism presented by myself, Wojtek Bereza, on behalf of the Transparent Company. So, today we're going to look at areas around the world where psychedelic medicine is legal. And we'll get into that term in a moment because it's not as binary as what I first thought. It breaks down into things like decriminalization, completely legal, and medical monopoly. So I guess we'll start with a definition. Well, psychedelic tourism actually has a parent term called medical tourism, which occurs when people cannot access treatment within the country that they live, which mainly occurs due to cost. In 2017, it was estimated by the American Journal of Medicine that around 14 to 16 million people traveled abroad for medical services each year. So essentially, people in the US, because there's no socialized health system, couldn't afford to get the treatment that they need where they lived. So they would often travel south or go around to different parts of the world where it's cheaper. Most common ailments include dental care, cosmetic surgery, elective surgery, fertility treatment, and mental health. And this really leads into this whole idea of psychedelic tourism. In the US, in certain states, psychedelic medicine is legal and it's changing. It seems like every day there's something new that's coming up. So people can access it there, but a lot of people still tend to want to access it in different places because it's cheaper. This isn't new. Medical tourism's been going on ever since really globalization. And psychedelic tourism isn't new either. It first was sparked off in the 1950s when a chap called Gordon Wasson wrote an article for Life magazine and famously documented his psilocybin ceremony with the Mazatec curandera, which is a healer, Maria Sabrina, in a place called Huautla de Jimenez in Mexico. After this, Sabina became a celebrity, and a flood of Western mushroom seekers flocked to Huautla, including John Lennon, Bob Dylan, and Mick Jagger. So, given what happened in the 1950s, then you had prohibition in the 1970s with Nixon and the war on drugs, which essentially made it illegal in most places. And you can see here on the map that the big, vast red spaces really occurred after the Vienna Convention, 1971, where they said this drug is very bad and you should make it illegal. And ever since the psychedelic renaissance, which we're actually in almost our 15th year now, so it's quite a long time since that term was invented, the world used to be completely red. For instance, Australia, where we're going to start, was completely illegal, but now it's prescribable. But before we get into the different illegalities and accessibilities of these medicines, it's really good to understand this idea that illegality isn't so much of a binary thing, because you kind of think like, is it legal or isn't it? Well, there's different levels. And if we have a look here on the key, right at the top, I've put medically prescribable as kind of dark green. And the reason I've put that is because the best way to take these medicines is under some sort of supervision. And when it's medically prescribable, you're pretty much guaranteed that it's going to be under the supervision of a psychiatrist, as designated, let's say, in Australia, or as a doctor as designated in elsewhere in the world. Below that, we've got another level of legality, which is legal without bar. So you've got places like Amsterdam in the Netherlands or Jamaica, where these things are accessible even without a prescription. So they can be bought from different places. You know, in Amsterdam, it's going to be a smart shop. In Jamaica, it's freely available, so it's completely uncontrolled. And then we go down the list and you get to things like partial psilocybin decriminalization, which is happening in the US. So Colorado and Oregon are great exceptions to the illegality of the federal rule. And then you go further down to places in South America where it's only legal for ceremonial use. And what we'll do in this video is just walk through different examples of these different categories, just to make this map make a bit more sense. What I found researching this video was really, as you go down these levels, there is an increased risk. So as I said at the beginning, medically prescribable is right at the top because you've definitely got someone there who's going to be looking after you and they're medically trained in CPR and anaphylaxis and mental health first aid. But then you go down to the completely legal. So let's say you go to Jamaica and you buy it from a stall and you take it just by yourself and something happens, which with every medicine adverse reactions can occur, and what you want to do is put yourself in the safest position possible with really someone to look after you and really someone to help with the integration and things afterwards. And then what you find is as you get into the orange, the kind of, because the risk keeps on increasing, but the positive side of it really for everyone else is accessibility because the cost reduces. The cost of going to a smart shop in Amsterdam to buy magic mushroom truffles for €10 is a lot cheaper than going to Jamaica and spending $5,000 for a couple of days. So really what I'm aiming at and being a pharmacist prescriber is really looking at accessibility, because these medicines are extremely important. They are one of the most effective medicines for things like treatment-resistant depression or anxiety or PTSD. However, it's obscene in some places how much these things cost. And the idea really behind this video and the end goal is really to try and figure out where that cost benefit analysis, where the best point is on a graph. And I'll show that to you in a moment. But just quickly, when you think of risk, you think of really safety and in medicine, and there's lots of levels to that. So what I've constructed is a level of risk analysis. So up at the top, we've got legal regulations, because you don't particularly want to get arrested taking these medicines, making sure that they can be legally consumed and you're not going to get into trouble for taking them, because that also affects the priming to the psychedelic experience. So if you're taking these medicines and you're worried that the police are going to turn up or there's some illegality going on, that's going to affect your trip. So it's good to have that pretty much sorted before you do anything. The next one is medical supervision, and I think this can really be kind of healthcare or trip sitter supervision, ensuring that emergency medical services are accessible. So, if you've got a heart condition or anxiety issues or all these different things, it's possible that during the trip it might trigger something, and having someone who's responsible and who's reputable as well, who can look after you, is really important. The next bit is cultural sensitivity, and we'll see about Maria Sabina and how that all played out, and what's happening in Peru with the ayahuasqueros and the over tourism there. Then the therapeutic environment, we kind of mentioned set and setting. It's seen that these medicines taken in a clinical environment are great because it's a controlled area, but there is some evidence to suggest that having it in a natural environment, such as in a forest, leads to better clinical outcomes. Then safety and security, accessibility, aftercare support. So there's a lot of data now saying that it's the aftercare and the integration of what happens during the psychedelic experience which is really important in predicting the long-term effects of these things. The cost effectiveness, ensure that no hidden costs occur, and I think that's really important as well. If you end up going to a retreat and then you're worried that there's going to be additional costs around that really does affect the set and setting of taking these medicines. And the last thing, which is extremely difficult, which is reputation and reviews, because a lot of these places, although they're deemed legal, and you'll see in South America they are deemed illegal, but they don't want to be completely open that they exist or have these open reviews, because they're worried that there's going to be some issues behind what they're doing and then they'll have to close down. So you'll find that you can find lots and lots of different online psilocybin retreats around the world, but they won't have a lot of reviews associated with it. So what we're trying to do with the transparent company is kind of be this central portal where we can have internal talks with these different retreats, and we can hold some trusted information about these places centrally, so that people can come to us, and almost like a tour guide, we can recommend different people. And that's really the importance behind the transparent company, because we want to be a company which is open and doesn't take money backhanders. So, and we can't, because the way that our company is structured, it's completely open. So this graph just explains this idea of kind of risk and where we want to be, in that you would think that if you have risk on the y-axis and cost on the x, you'd think this point, which is high cost equals low risk, would be the best place. Conversely, on the other side, you say low cost equals high risk, okay? And you think maybe that there's a straight line if it's proportional like that. But as I know from drugs and therapy, this isn't often the case after the initial release, and the curve looks like this. There's an inflection point in the middle where you can get relative low cost for relative low risk. And this is really the biting point. This is where we want to be. But how to find that? And I think where that comes from is doing a review. So having a look at what's available and comparing and listening to people's feedback, and listing each retreat in order of this kind of risk matrix of, are they meeting all these criteria, and can we tick them off against this without any bias? So where do these retreats exist? And the map itself shows you that in Australia and Canada, under a doctor, it being medically prescribed, that's the top end. But as I said, in Australia, it's not actually available yet. But there's documented evidence saying that when it does come out, a psilocybin or MDMA trip will cost around about 5 to 10,000 USD for one sitting. And there's multiple issues with this. One of them being that a lot of people can get a huge amount of relief from MDMA and psilocybin, and a lot of the time it's long term and it's for the rest of the people's lives. But some cases, people take a dose and then the effect wears off, and then they have to go for another dose and that effect wears off. And it's different for different people, but sometimes it's around about 6 to 12 months. And it's very difficult in a lot of these settings where, especially in Australia at the moment, it has to be done under a clinical trial with an ethics board approval. So it means, yes, it is available. Some psychiatrists under the AP scheme can prescribe it. However, at the moment, it's extremely rare. Australia is in the same category as Denmark and Canada, meaning those three countries, specific doctors can prescribe these medicines, which is absolutely fantastic. But next, we're going to go to the next level, which is, where are these medicines? And we're really concentrating on psilocybin at the moment. And the reason for that is things like LSD last for a lot longer. They last for about 11 hours. Things like DMT or ayahuasca are quite quick and quite intense. And psilocybin is really seen as this kind of middle ground. And that's why in those two dark green countries, they have legalized them first to be medically prescribable, because they're kind of seen as these almost like safe bets. But on this next level, we're going to go to this kind of lighter green, which is legal with conditions. And that really includes, at the moment, and this video is done in late 2023, that this occurs in the Netherlands and this occurs in Jamaica. And we'll look at both countries. So to Amsterdam, and we're not going to the Netherlands because Amsterdam is where the law actually applies, and it's one of two countries, including Jamaica, where it's fully legal. However, it is restricted in the formulation, so you only can get the psilocybin mushroom truffles, which are available from these smart shops. It comes from one of the friends of the transparent company, and you can see here that you can get 10 grams for €15, which is 15 USD. So that's available, and you can go and fly into the Netherlands, downtown. You go to a smart shop and you can pick them up. Quite straightforward, but then you've got no one to supervise you. You've got no trip sitter. So some people opt for a retreat, and there's lots and lots around Amsterdam. And that includes monitoring, medication, and some integration. And we've seen costings of around 3,500 USD. So short retreat, quite secure in what they are. A lot of them are medically supervised, very clean. You can get your own room, but it's cheaper to get a bigger one. And yeah, we have a few favorites down there, which we've heard very, very good reviews about. A quick touch on the rest of Europe, and we'll start with Portugal. So Portugal decriminalized the personal possession of all drugs in 2001. But what does that mean? As we said, the binary nature of this legal illegal is a little bit more grey and in between. So it's really good to understand what the difference between legalization and decriminalization is. And I've written it here. So legalization completely removes all penalties related to possession and authorized sale. So as you said, in the Netherlands, truffles, Jamaica, the mushrooms themselves, you can have them and no one's going to come up to you, and there won't be an issue. However, decriminalization is a bit different. It involves reducing but not eliminating the penalties for breaking a particular law. So as such, although it's still illegal, although decriminalized, in Portugal you can get retreats for around about 5,000 USD for 6 days. And then wider Europe, I think it's important just to mention this drug, which is ketamine, which is not a classical psychedelic. It's what they call a dissociative. And the reason why it's included is there's been a lot of retrospective studies on this medicine looking at, after people have taken it, what are the long-term effects? And it's been shown that they're very similar to the psychedelics in how they can help reduce treatment-resistant depression symptoms. So across Europe, prescribers have been prescribing off-label ketamine for years. It's available as something called S-ketamine, which is nasally administered. One hive of these kind of clinics is in London, in the centre of West End, and some treatments go for £6,000 for a course of low-dose treatment and talking therapy, and that's a Guardian. That's a Guardian article. So just lastly, to kind of finish off, so that's Europe, but we're just going to touch briefly on Jamaica, which is the other legal with conditions. And I think it's important to say, because it brings it up against Amsterdam, where the truffles are available. And what's interesting here is that the law never changed. So when the war on drugs really hit off, which was in 1971, Jamaica never signed up to it. So their government never outlawed the hallucinogenic fungus. And as such, and because of its close proximity to the US, it's really interesting that it's seen a huge amount of investment for retreats. And there's actually one of the superstars of the movement from back in the 60s was a guy called Timothy Leary, and his son is out there and on a place called Evo Retreats, and it's a minimum of 5,200 USD per person for a double occupancy room. And again, we've run these 9 risk factors against that, and it looks absolutely fantastic. And we're hearing some good reviews about it. And we would like to collect more. If you have any time, just pop down to thetransparent.company/review and tell us what you think about any place that you've been before. And the idea is we'll collect them centrally for everyone and openly distribute. So next is the USA. So you've got North America, and as I said before, the most interesting places there at the moment for psilocybin is really Colorado, which is in the middle, and Oregon, which is a bit up top. And it's been legalized, but it's been regulated, so it's kind of more this kind of decriminalized aspect. You can't just walk into a shop and purchase it. they are letting people access it, but kind of in a more controlled environment, but not so much from a medical sense, more from a psychologist or counseling sense. So it's a little bit easier to access. That's a big problem with medicalization is there's not that many psychiatrists or there's not that many doctors who you can go and see and get a prescription and have these things administered. Whereas what's happening in North America is it's becoming a little bit more equitable for access. However, there's lots of people in the US, there's 300 million, and there's one place that we saw, which you can see on Business Insider, there's 3,000 people on a waiting list just to access it, and the cost is around about $5,386, which is a lot of money if you include flights, if you're coming from, say, Australia or from Europe to access these things. So a lot of people end up from the US traveling south, i.e. from medical tourism. We talked about kind of dental and medical care, but they end up going to across the border. They end up going south of the US border and taking things like ayahuasca, which is traditionally taken in Ecuador, Colombia, Peru, and Brazil, which is a type of DMT, and it's drinkable, so it's edible, and it can be quite intense and short, as I mentioned before. But magic mushrooms tend to be accessed in Mexico, and one of the reasons for that is there is this thing called the Federal Penal Code, and Article 195 specifies that authorities can't prosecute someone if magic mushrooms are consumed for traditional and spiritual practice or ceremonies. And this is where Maria Sabina comes in, and it is very, very important because Wasson went down there in the 1950s and documented this in Life magazine. It's very open and very well known that this is where these medicines come from. And they actually come from this area of Mexico, which is called Oaxaca. And Marina Sabina and Wasson unveiled this incredible thing to the world. And it meant that there is this incredible traditional history which has been going on for thousands and thousands of years. And because of what happened with the Life magazine and lots of tourists coming down, it's led to this increase in sophistication of what's offered. So there's lots of different retreats in that area, and that's led to a decrease in price. So if you looked all over the world, it seems that the most retreats available and the highest sophistication, if we're thinking about that risk category, actually lies in Mexico. And as I said, Oaxaca, and this all came from Maria Sabina, who's from Huautla, which is in this area. And I don't know if this has been photoshopped, but up at the top of the gate towards the entrance to Marina Sabina's house and to the village of Huautla are mushrooms, But if you read this story, which is, her brother was killed and her house was burnt down, and tourism became so disruptive it caused the government authorities to set up military checkpoints on the road to the village who believed her to be a drug dealer. But there's this always give and take with tourism, bringing people in, and the money it brings, the tourist dollar, it's fantastic, but unfortunately it often wipes out the area and the traditional use for it, as money brings commerce and commerce brings hotels. And so what's actually happened is a lot of tourists have realized that this is almost kind of a sacred site of where this medicine was released into the West. So a lot of them go to this place, which is San Jose del Pacifico, which is just down the road. And that's got a massive tourism. And this is where this lecture actually started. A member of the transparent community, they came up to me and said, can you have a look at this review? Can you put up these 9 risk matrices? And we did have some reviews of other people going to it, and it was called the Refugio Terraza de la Tierra. It's very interesting just really going over it, but you can really see the difference in the quality of these places. So this place, whether it has a medical doctor or it has facilities, if you have certain disabilities, accessibility, is the aftercare support there? Is it a therapeutic environment? although it is culturally sensitive. So that's Mexico. We're going to pop into Brazil just quickly. And Brazil is one of the most tolerant countries regarding magic mushrooms and other psychedelics. This is largely thanks to the indigenous population, many of which have used a variety of psychedelics for generations. The 1971 Vienna Convention, which really sparked off the war on drugs, determined the banning of many psychedelics, but it had this Article 32 and an exception for some countries' indigenous people, and Brazil was among them. However, the country's drug law haven't practically changed since 2006, when its current legislation, Portaria, came to be. And according to this law, psilocybin and psilocin are actually illegal. However, technically, this only applies to the isolated substances and not the mushrooms themselves. And that's why on that map, it's orange. It isn't legal. It's written into there that the chemical constituent is not legal. However, there's this kind of edge around the law, which is fascinating. And then we'll move on to Peru, which seems almost like a mecca for psychedelic medicine. It's completely legal to chew coca leaves, drink ayahuasca, and to take San Pedro. And San Pedro is a mescaline, is a cactus where mescaline comes from. And that's because they're part of Peru's traditional medicine. However, magic mushrooms are not included on this. It is the fact that because they haven't been used in tradition for such a long time, it's come about that it's illegal to take and therefore should be avoided. So that's all of the countries. So you'll notice in this part of the world, Asia, that area there, it's completely red. And one country stands out, which is Thailand, and it became the first country in Asia to decriminalize cannabis after it delisted marijuana as a narcotic in 2022. And it was fine, it is fine to own and grow cannabis, distribute plants and smoke it. However, there's some caveats which you can't really do it in a public place and cause a public disturbance. I've been asked a lot of times about, if they first do cannabis, then obviously it's going to be magic mushrooms and then it's just going to be a free-for-all. And that's not really the case. There's been speculation, and cannabis really is a crack in the door, which has happened in the US. However, their new prime minister has said the government will rectify its cannabis policy and limit its use in the future because there's been lots of complaints about what's been going on. So we've been busy at the Transparent Company, and we've made this internal group called the Psychedelic Buyers Club. And it's the idea of people grouping together and doing this responsibly and looking for the best places to do it. And it really evolved around the idea of integration sessions and the idea of set and setting. It's extremely important that you're in the right state of mind and you're in the right environment. And one easy way to do it is to connect with others around you and then go as a group. And if you look at the statistics, in Australia, 1 in 7 people have depression. In the US, it's something like 1 in 5. And what we want to do is to start connecting people together to have conversations about what they want to do, whether they want to go to a psychiatrist or a doctor, and then working their way down this risk category and using the risk factors that were generated to help people make their own adult decisions about what to do. So we've got a newsletter. This is very early in its development, and if you'd like to sign up, you can sign up on the left, or on the right there is an online course which can help you freely explore these different aspects which we've been talking about.